1% of dudes rapping, they ain't nice as me. 98% ain't live the same type of life as me. The judge gave me life and then they sent me where the life is be. That level 4 with depth and vice, the type of stuff they like to see. Two choices, fight or flee. I refuse to die a chump. I never been a mark, but damn, it's scary when that riot jump. I seen dudes cry, get pumped, and some sexually brutalized. Knew a dude who lost his life and he was only doing 5 year-long racial fights when homie all you do is ride. Lonely days and nights up in a hole causing suicide. From the moment you arrive, you see the Mexican mafia, AB skinheads with big giant swastikas, pro-black philosophers, the BGF, the Kumi, and Muslims who will murk you from the nation to the Sunni. That MS was loony, quick to ride up on they rival. Even Christians went to church, hide knives up in a Bible. Political and tribal, the Crips and Damus, the Long Beach, the Hubs and the Dubs and the Grooves, the IE, the Bakersfield, the Dago Pyrus, the hustlers quick to roll, the gangsters don't move, whatever click you choose. Say what's cracking YouTube, it's your boy 16 to life, and I'm back like I'm on a parole violation. Yard down. So today we have a very special guest with me. Thank you for coming. Her name is Niesha Davis. At one point in time, she worked in the capacity of a mental health therapist inside of California Department of Corrections. I believe she said she worked for about 5 years. So Niesha, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, Eric. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Niesha Davis, and I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I am a trauma therapist. And yes, as you mentioned, I work for the Department of Corrections for 5 years. I have a lot of experience working in mental health fields. I've worked in a lot of different areas outside of the Department of Corrections as a medical social worker and child protective services and 3B, which is the mental health psych ward. I've worked at a school, and I've also worked in an STRTP facility for at-risk youth children.
Okay, so can you explain to me and the viewers what is the STRP? Because I'm not familiar with that acronym.
It's short-term restricted treatment program. So it's basically a group home, but where the children receive intensified services and a group home placement, so they get increased mental health services.
Oh, okay, thank you. And then also, before we go any further, can you tell us about your YouTube page? And you told me that you had wrote a book, so we definitely want to be able to get that in there too.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So first of all, I do have a YouTube channel, so please go follow me, like, subscribe. My YouTube channel is called Motivational Master-Peace, and it's just basically giving you tools and strategies that you can use on your own to help you become the master of your peace of mind. As a therapist, it is my goal with my YouTube channel just to provide strategies and tools for people to be able to just cope through day-to-day life. So again, go find me on YouTube, Motivational Master-Peace, Niesha Davis, LCSW. And yes, I recently published a book called Your Story Does Not Define You, a healing journey from trauma through expression and self-affirmation. And as a trauma therapist, this book is geared towards anyone and everyone, men, women, teenagers, adults. And it's just basically a book to kind of help you to start your healing journey on healing from trauma. The book is interactive, so it does challenge you to really dive in and address your trauma, identify it, and also to provide you tools and strategies on how to be able to affirm yourself to start your healing journey and begin to start your healing journey from trauma.
All right, and so how did you wind up working in the California Department of Corrections? Was that something that you planned on doing, or was that something that just came open in by way of like the job being open?
Well, it is actually something that I had a desire to do. When I worked in the department, when I worked in child protective services, I worked there for quite a bit of time. And getting into mental health field and working for the prison system is something that I've just desired to do. So when I worked at for child protective services, I did apply to work at the prison system, and they called me right after I left there and accepted a job as a medical social worker somewhere else. So I was pretty excited and looking forward to it, as it was one of my career goals once I became licensed to actually work at the Department of Corrections.
And so I'm wondering, like, how does that work when you get hired and stuff? Do you get to ask what prison you want to work at, or they just kind of send you where they have an opening?
Well, you know what? You can apply for several prisons. So I believe I started off applying for several prisons and I took the first opportunity that came to me. And so I did go work for a level 4 prison when I first started my journey at the
Okay.
Department of Corrections. And so, yeah, it was something different for me. I definitely was excited about it and definitely experienced a lot and learned a lot as well when I was there.
Okay, so like as opposed to working in the free world, like we say sometimes in prison, does due to the fact that you're working in prison, does the job have higher pay due to the nature of it being in a a setting that could be violent and stuff?
Yes, absolutely. So, working for the Department of Corrections, you do get paid a substantial amount of money working in the field. As you mentioned, it is a higher risk. You're working with a higher risk population because of the circumstances why people are there. However, it is, a lot of people go work there because of the financial benefits of working there. And a lot of people end up staying there and retiring because of that. So it was a great experience when I was there. I definitely learned a lot for sure.
Uh-huh. And so before you actually, entered the prison, did they give you any type of like special type of training? I'm sure they gave you guys some, at least, a kind of like a lecture about what to do and what not to do. Did you guys get
Right.
anything like that?
Right. Absolutely. So before you actually begin to work and go behind the gates, period, you do have to go through a training just like any other job. You go through human resources. You learn about the safety risk with the job within the job title that you accept. So of course they talk to us about all of the safety risk, about the no hostage policy, just about everything that we can expect and encounter, about the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries and just knowing the population that we work with because again, I mean, as you know, working in that population, you experience a lot of different things, you encounter a lot of different people. So you do want to make sure that you are aware of the safety risk and the safety factors. And then as well as I had a brother incarcerated at that time, so he was also giving me some wisdom and knowledge and golden nuggets that I definitely needed before I started working behind the bars.
Right. Now you mentioned something to me that sounded a little interesting. You mentioned the no hostage policy. So can you further elaborate on that and explain what that was and if that gave you any like trepidation about taking the job?
Well, I think it could be very intimidating to hear that if something were to happen to you, that they don't have a no hostage policy per se in the prison, and that pretty much like if you got took, they might not help you.
So if somebody snatch you up, they ain't coming to get you, huh?
That's what they say. That's what they teach you in there, that nobody's coming to get you. However, I do think that if they the circumstances, if they were able to help somebody out, I believe that they really would.
Right. Now, excuse me kind of for saying this, but let's keep it 100. You are gorgeous. Did you have any like apprehension about going into a prison where, men have not seen women in such a long time?
I wouldn't say that I had apprehension per se. I would say that I definitely made sure that I had great boundaries because, again, like, working in a prison and I worked in a male facility, working in a prison, working around men. Of course, you see a woman, whether you think she's gorgeous or not, they're going to try to holler at you. Okay. And I
Right.
don't know who was worse, the inmates or the officer.
Okay.
So
Right.
yeah, but no apprehension. I just feel like you have to have very, very great boundaries for sure.
Right. So I think it goes without saying that at least some of the inmates or the prisoners would look and potentially try to holler. But you said some of the guards tried to holler and put their bid in too, huh? Do you think that some of them crossed the line with you at times?
Of course. Yes,
Hmm.
of course. I mean, I
Right.
think people try to push their line, and I think whether they're working in a prison or outside of a prison, that's just something to be expected anywhere, right? People are
Right.
going to try to push their line, but it's up to you to determine how far you're going to let that line go.
Right. Okay. Most definitely. And then, so can you explain like your job setting? Did you have an office? Were you on the yard? For those who've never been to prison and stuff like that, explain. how your job went.
Okay. So yes, absolutely. I did have an office outside of the yard where I would basically go to work to do my paperwork, computer work, and things that I needed to do there. When I did have interactions with the inmates, I did have an office on the yard. I did work on a main line for a period of time, as well as most of my time within the Department of Corrections. I worked in ADSEC for the majority of the time that I was there. And so I did have an office in both locations. Sometimes I did have to go help on another yard. And when I had to go help on another yard, I also was able to utilize the office space there as well.
And for those of you who may not understand, ADSEG is administrative segregation. So basically, she's working in the hole where people are isolated from the general population. And sometimes, when people hear the hole, they're thinking of these like rooms and stuff that you see in old school prison movies. But the hole is basically a regular building, minus we don't get the certain amenities that we get on the yard, TVs, stuff like that. So it's just a regular same building. You don't get to go to the yard, you don't get to use the phone and stuff like that. And so how would a person go about seeing you? Like, what did your job entail in prison? So you spoke to people who had mental health issues and stuff?
Right, correct. So working on the main line as well as working in ADSEG, I did have a caseload. So I already had people that were on my caseload that were triple CMS or either EOP. And so those were people that I already knew I had to see, whether it was somebody coming in for the first time and I had to meet with them for an initial assessment, or whether it was for somebody that I was following up with every week. So I had a caseload of people that were already on my caseload.
And even though I did a considerable amount of time in prison, I'm still not quite I still don't know exactly what triple CMS or EOP is. I have a basic idea, but can you break that down for us too, please?
Yes, so triple CMS were inmates that were basically experiencing mild to moderate mental health symptoms, something as simple as depression, anxiety, or just struggling to being in prison for the first time if they were there for a first time, or maybe people that were lifers and had a more lengthier sentence. And then the people that were EOP were basically inmates that suffered from a severely mental health situation or illness or diagnosis. So they basically had more severe symptoms and required a higher level of care. And so I most of my inmates that I work with were triple CMS. And so yeah, that's the difference between the two.
For the amount of people in the yard, do you felt that it balanced out? Did you have many people coming to see you, or do you felt like maybe the stigma of not wanting to seem weak in prison prevented a lot of people from putting in slips and stuff to come see you and talk to you?
Well, I would say no. I think that I felt like I had a balanced amount of work to do because when I did work on the main line, I did work on a triple CMS yard. And so basically, everybody that was on that yard
Okay.
were pretty much people that were receiving mental health services. So I don't think that there were any stigmas associated. I've worked at two different prisons when I was working in the Department of Corrections, and I won't share which two I worked at. But the second one that I worked at, there were a mixture of populations when I worked in ADSEG. So yes, you would hear people say something or feel a certain kind of way about people that were receiving mental health services. But as far as the workload and the caseload goes, I feel like it was fair for the amount of work and the amount of people that I had to see.
And so, did you, outside of like your regular job, did you ever get, by working in the prison, did you ever get a glimpse or a peep at regular prison life for the prisoners? And if so, what shocked you most about it, and what did you think of it when you got a firsthand look at it?
I will say this because I did get to see, like I said, I worked on several yards that weren't triple CMS. I mean, I've been on the yard when there was a riot that happened. I've seen people get in a fight. I've seen people come into the hospital there and, that were injured. I've sat in committee meetings. I've done a lot and I've observed a lot when I was there. One of the things that I will say is that I really didn't know exactly what to expect because I mentioned earlier I did have a brother that was incarcerated who did quite a bit of time in prison. And prior to working there, I didn't really know. Actually, I'm going to be honest, I didn't know what to expect. But when I got in there, I realized that life in prison is a total different life than here outside on the world. It's a total different society with rules and regulations of their own and things that people had to abide by. So it was very different. It was very different. And I think that the first month or so, me working there, I probably cried a lot, on my way to work or on my way home from work, just for the simple fact that I just felt sorry for my brother that he had to live in there, you know. I felt sad that I didn't know that these were the things that he had to deal with on a day-to-day basis. You know, prior to that, talking to him on the phone, having conversations with him were just things that I didn't know that he had to deal with. And my heart just really went out to him. And then also just went out to people in general.
Right. And you know, you of course I was not gonna not I was going to not address that situation. I had that in my questions for later on, but okay, since you mentioned it, you had a brother, he done a whole lot of time, and that's what I was gonna ask you. So once you got a up and close personal look at what he had to go through, how did it affect you guys' relationship? Did it make your bond a little tighter? Did it make you, you know, because sometimes I think, especially now by being free, I understand that we have good intentions sometimes, you know, for people locked up. I still have several friends, you know, I've sent money back to and stuff, but it's a world going on out here. You know, we
Right.
wake up with things to do, and we can't always I guess remember the people who we don't see daily every day sometimes, you know.
Right.
But due to the fact that you did work in there and it was a constant reminder of what your brother had to endure, how did that strengthen you guys' bond and stuff or anything like that?
Well, I will say this. I mean, we already were close. Me and that particular brother, we already had a strong relationship. I mean, it did for me make me just be more accountable of, you know, making sure that I was doing my part as far as like being a support system to him. You know, he had a great support system from family and friends. So, you know, people writing him, sending him money, helping him get packages, things like that. So just making sure that I was doing my part as a sister to be there to support him, you know, to write him letters, to talk to him on the phone, and just offer an encouraging word. And for me, he was a very great support system for me because, again, at the beginning, when I first worked there and I had to go to the yard, I really didn't know what to expect. And I'm not going to lie, you know, I was a little intimidated when I was walking through the yard, you know, being a female. And you know, I don't look half that bad. So, you know, of course, people are gonna try to press their line and people saying stuff to you. And I was like, okay, what do I do? Am I supposed to speak back or do I keep walking? You know, or what am I supposed to say?
Right.
So my brother was a great support system to me in that regard because one of the things that he told me is like, okay, these are people just like out there. So you don't have to be afraid to speak to them and you don't have to be afraid to say something. Just don't come across as a bitch because then people won't like you.
Right. And so, did your brother, when you initially mentioned to him that you may be getting a job or that you had aspirations to work in a prison facility, was he ever kind of reluctant or did not want you to work in there? Or I don't have a sister, but I believe if I ever did, I would always want to try to protect her and stuff like that. And so, did he? Did he ever? You know, how was his feelings toward that?
Okay. Yeah, I don't think he did not want me to work there. I just feel like he wanted to make sure that he provided me with all the information that I needed as far as like safety concerns go. And
Mhm.
just making sure that I was okay, making sure that I was, you know, being mindful and being attentive and, you know, using discernment and paying attention to what's going on and not, you know, get baited into something that I probably can't get myself out of.
Right. And so your brother, I believe, done close to 30 years. So he had an extremely good idea of what goes on in prison. So
Right.
that was I'm pretty sure that was comforting to have a person who could give you an inside opinion on what to do and what not to do and stuff like that.
Right.
Um, you mentioned at one point I think you said well you had saw a riot. Did you actually see the riot or was you just present when were you in the facility when the riot happened? And either or, did the viciousness of prison, seeing it up and personal, did it did it change your ideas about prison and stuff?
Um, like I said, I think my first couple of months, weeks there working there changed my vision and my idea of what prison really is. Because again, I didn't realize how much of a different society and how much of it's a society within itself there at the prison. So I think, seeing riots, seeing people get into fights, being inside of a dorm and a fight breaking out, or being on the yard or walking through the yard and something jumps off. I think that was a little scary, just being in that vicinity, because you don't know what's going to happen. I don't think that it changed my view of what prison is like, because again, I think that kind of happened early on. So like when things happen along the way, it was just things that I expected to happen being in that particular environment.
Mm-hmm. And so did any prisoners just try to poorly like approach you? I mean, outside of just hi, hello, did they really try to shoot they shot? I mean, I've been around some prisoners who swore that every girl was looking at them and all that type of stuff. So did you encounter those type of dudes? If you speak, they thought you wanted them and all that stuff?
Yeah, I've had people like really try to shoot their shot. Like I've had people on my caseload that we might be in the office talking, and they be like, Miss Davis, give me your number, and I'm like, no. Now, why are you trying to add? Good well I'm not giving you my number. And
Right.
I would just talk to them like that, because at the end of the day, they're going to try to cross boundaries. And if you let them, they're going to keep trying. Like they're going to press that line, like I said, to see how far they can go. And if you
Right.
give them an inch, they're going to try to take a mile. And so
Right.
I think with the boundaries, it wasn't that I was trying to be mean or disrespectful, but at the same time, considering the environment, I had to make sure that I was doing my due diligence. Like I love people because, for first and foremost, I'm a woman of God. And so I love people. I don't judge people. Going to work there was not it was not my job to go judge people and convict people. That was not my job. So for me, like when people tried to get at me, I would just say something, to let them know, like, look, just stop it. Okay. Like you're not getting my number. Stop trying to holler at me. Sometimes I would just ignore stuff. If I would be walking through the yard and somebody might say something like, hey, sunshine, or, stuff like that. They sing songs, say little stuff to you. I just chuckle to myself and keep walking.
Right. So did I notice now the guards in there when we had like the guards had little buttons on little, if they basically like a panic button or if
Alarm.
something is happening, an
Uh-huh.
alarm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Did they give you one of those as well?
Yes, absolutely. So I did have an alarm. So when I worked on the main line yard, I would actually see inmates in my office, and they would come in the office. I would close the door. They weren't handcuffed or anything like that. So we would be right across from each other, maybe like 20 feet, maybe 25 feet away from each other at the most. And so we had to carry the alarm, because if something popped off, if somebody, got irate or something happened, of course, we have to be mindful of our safety, because I did want to go home every day.
Right. And so did you ever have a situation where you had to hit the alarm where an inmate became irate or upset?
I did have one situation where I did hit my alarm, and that particular situation, it was just an inmate that was in there that was kind of like irritable, kind of like hyped up, having a lot of anxiety, and was frustrated because he didn't get to see the psychiatrist and he was trying to change his medication. So he was kind of like lashing out on me. Of like trying to hurry up and get his medications and demanded me that he needed to see the psychiatrist, and he started getting loud. And so at that point, I kindly was like, okay, you got to go. Like I excused him from my office. He acted like he didn't want to go. So then I had to push my alarm so that I could get back up. But he didn't do anything to me. But definitely that was one time, probably out of the whole 5 years that I worked there, that I was actually like afraid for my life, is because I didn't know what that guy was going to do, because he was really amped up, frustrated, irritated, and act like he was going to knock my head off.
So do you think at times prisoners put in like slips to see you unnecessarily just to come be in the presence of a woman?
Well, I wouldn't say, for me personally, I don't feel like I felt that way, because for me, because I had a caseload and I was going to see them anyway, they knew I was coming eventually throughout the week, that I think they just probably waited. I did, when I worked in AdSec, had people that was on my caseload that would, if I was like doing walk around rounds or something, just checking on everybody, like, hey, I'm gonna pull you out. Some people that I wasn't there to see would say, oh man, I need to talk to you. Like, one guy in particular, he was always trying to come talk to me. He wanted to read me poems that he wrote, but there was like hidden subliminal messages in the
Right.
poems about me. And then I had to check him and be like, look, I'm not gonna listen to this, type of thing. So
And so, while you said you worked in in ad seg, because I know that um, the times that I was in ad seg were the only times I actually was in close proximity to people who committed suicide. It seems like the isolation affects people more than just being in a normal setting where you can have a cellmate to talk to or people to talk to. Did you
right.
happen to, did you happen to be an ad seg when people committed suicide and just being in that isolation atmosphere period? Do you think that like affected the psyche more than just regular prison?
I will say this. I mean, I feel like whether in prison or out of prison, any person that is in a dark space or in a dark place in their life and they feel really hopeless and helpless, that really does affect a person's mental stability. So when I worked in AdSeg at the prison that I was at the time, I don't believe that we had a suicide in that particular prison or an AdSeg per se. We did have a suicide within the prison, but it was actually on a different yard and it wasn't on an asset yard. But I will say that, isolation, being being isolated from people that you love, or just being isolated from people in general, being able to have those social connections and social conversations, I feel that can affect somebody mentally because again, it'll lead somebody to get to a really dark place. And when a person is in a dark place and they feel like they have no hope or they feel helpless and they feel like, life is just hard and it's not going to change and they don't see a way out, then I think that's when people feel like they want to end it. And I feel like just from working in the prison and just hearing different stories and statistics about people that end their life by suicide are people that, are coming in for their first term, maybe have a longer sentence and they don't see how they're going to fulfill that sentence. People that have committed certain crimes that aren't welcoming within the prison system. So I feel like those specific things will cause a person to want to end their life by suicide. I feel like they rather just end it instead of having to go through the different challenges that they might experience while they're in there.
Mm-hmm. Did lack of communication or lack of family support seem to be like a common theme with a lot of the prisoners that you spoke to that got them down in the dumps?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. I mean, you had a lot of people in there that didn't have people writing them, that didn't have people sending them packages, or, just they can't call. So they're looking for that support within the prison system itself. So that support can come from your mental health therapist, from the guards, from other inmates. They're looking for that social connection, which I feel like is so important. It's something that we all need to be able to survive. If people are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that is one of the things that as a human being that we need to survive. We have to have social, emotional connections to be able to live a fulfilled life.
Mm-hmm. And then I noticed that especially around the holidays, you would seem that more prisoners would be homesick, kind of emotional, or kind of just missing their family more. Did you
Right.
happen to notice that?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like a lot of that has to do with, as a trauma therapist, a lot of people have experienced a lot of different traumatic experiences in their lives that go all the way back from childhood to adulthood. And so if we particularly focus like on holidays and special time of the years, anniversaries, birthdays, and things like that, sometimes people have lost loved ones during those times, or sometimes it makes people go back and recollect times that they had with their families prior to being in prison. That again causes them to be triggered. They begin to struggle. They feel a little bit more depression, anxiety during those times because, again, being away from family or either have lost family and remembering, okay, the hurt and the pain and the things that you experiences during those times.
Mm-hmm. And I think you mentioned something that's extremely important, because prison is a place where I believe that a lot of people feel they have to be tough in order to survive. They have to portray a certain type of image, and by me being a life or two, at some point in time, they came up with these self-help classes that we had to take. And
Mhm.
during these self-help classes, you would have a lot of prisoners get up there and speak on traumatic situations that occurred at some point in their lives that made them, or at least was a catalyst into being the person that they turned out to be. And I think that a lot of people who have not gone to prison don't experience, or I mean, excuse me, don't realize some of the trauma that a lot of these people went through. And for me, just hearing some of these stories, and honestly made me feel lucky to even have survived prison to that point, because when you're in a small cell with a person, you don't know what that person has went through. You don't know what you may do in there that seems harmless could trigger a past experience from this, and I heard from that particular person. And I heard a lot of people just say a lot of things, how they was whooped by their dad or molested or stuff. And so I think that's just very important that, I think sometimes we see people in prison and we think, oh, the good for them. But a lot of those, in my situation, I always say I was a square going bad, but a lot of those dudes had real, some issues, like I said, it just made me feel thankful that I had survived that long. Did you talk to a lot of people who had traumatic experiences?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you brought up a good point in being able to identify just how, some people's traumatic experience affected them. So one of the things that a lot of people don't really understand when it comes to trauma is that people associate trauma itself with whatever the particular event or situation that happened to a person. But really, the effects of trauma are the emotional distress that is caused by the event. So it's not necessarily the event itself, but it's the emotional distress that is caused by the event. So when you talk about people that share their stories about different things that they've experienced as a child or growing up, it's that emotional feelings that people experience is what are the lasting effects of a traumatic experience, because those are the feelings that rise up when you get triggered. Okay, if you felt very hurt, if you felt some amount of hurt or pain or distress or depression or violation, rejection, guilt, all of these different things are feelings that are associated with people who have experienced a traumatic event. So it's those feelings that rise up when certain things happen, when a person gets triggered, and that's what takes them back. So you would be surprised when a person grows up. Just say, for example, a person that have watched their father per se abuse their mother, and their mother has experienced physical abuse, and that child was in the home and witnessed that. You will see that studies show that children grow up and tend to have more aggression, whether it's verbal or physical, and they tend to grow up being a person that lashes out at people and is verbally and physically aggressive, and may also end up in a relationship to where they are also being abusive to that person. And so these are cycles and things that happen throughout time that a lot of people don't understand and see that they're cycles. Some people call them generational curses. I call them generational cycles and patterns. And people repeat what they see. And again, in order for a person to heal from that and get past that, they have to be able to identify and know, okay, what experiences that really happened to me to cause me to feel hurt, to cause me to feel pain, to cause me to feel rejected, because that's how you begin to move and heal from that.
Right. And I think also, growing up as men, especially I was born in the 70s, and men from my generation, we were taught that we as men, especially those of us who eventually joined the gang culture, we was taught certain, I guess, feelings and emotions it was uncool to exhibit. So
Right.
we was taught to stuff those and not talk about things that hurt us. So of course, the more we stuff those negative emotions inside, eventually it's going to have to come out. The biggest trash can in the world is going to get full and it's going to have to overflow. And so
That's
when we're not allowed to talk about things that hurt us, or we're made to feel less than, eventually it's going to explode. And sometimes it's going to explode in some form of anger, especially when we're living a lifestyle where anger and violence is accepted and even approved, I guess. So do you think that gang members feeling that we have to be macho and we can't be sad, do you think that contributes to the violence?
Yes, absolutely. I definitely agree, because one of the things that you mentioned, which is so profound, is that people suppress feelings and emotions, right? And when a person experiences trauma, they tend to disassociate, which just means like they pretend like those things didn't happen. They try to ignore it, they try to bury it and put it under the ground, but those things resurface. And so, like you mentioned, like we can only hold so much. Like we can only suppress so much before eventually all of that stuff is going to build up and we're going to be like a volcano and eventually erupt and eventually explode. So, one of the things that is important, I think, is for people to understand, even in prison. Like I understand with the politics that there's certain, gang rules that people can't go access mental health services. But even if you are in that situation and you can't access mental health services, you have to be able to learn how to use tools and strategies that you can utilize on your own to help you to release some of this pressure, release some of these feelings and emotions that you're feeling. Because again, you're human. And one of the things is that we don't wake up every day and our great self and we perform at our best. I'm a therapist and I'll be the first to tell you that I don't wake up every day and it's a great day and it's a peachy day and a great walk in the park, because it's not. There's days that I wake up and I'm not okay and I have to check myself and do things to help me to regulate and get back to a space that I feel like is a baseline for me. So when it comes to gang members and things like that, okay, you see so many men that are feeling depressed, but the way that they express this depression is through anger, through verbal aggression, and through physical aggression. And so, one of the things I do, I run 2 trauma healing circles. I do one for men and one for women. And one of the things that I often hear in my men's trauma healing circle is just exactly what you said. People were raised to be strong, to be tough, not to cry, not to talk about their feelings. And all that is a bunch of buildup that turns into depression and turns into anger and then turns into verbal and physical aggression.
This conversation reminds me of an incident when um, I was locked up with a good friend of mine, and his mother had passed away, and so he went to the office, and he didn't want to stay over there long. He talked 2 or 3 minutes. He didn't want to be emotional in front of, because when they call you to the office, they've got like a lieutenant or a sergeant. They give you a free phone call, let you know your mom passed away, and so he didn't want the officers to see him in that moment. Then like a day or two later, we was out on the yard and we was talking. He started crying and stuff for a hot second. And he said, man, I'm out here looking like a bitch. And I told him, come on, homie, your mom passed. Of course, you're supposed to be sad, And he wiped his face and said, I'm supposed to go inside. But to me, that moment was just extremely, it was profound because, we are taught as gang members, or at least a lot of us believe, even in moments where the person or the woman who birthed us and brought us into this world, if she happens to pass away and we're in prison, we're not going to be able to attend the funeral. We're not even supposed to cry and look weak. And I think that, it's kind of sad sometimes the belief system that we will allow ourselves to be tricked in, where we don't even feel like grieving for our mother is acceptable, and so it just
Right.
it's a horrible way to live life, I think,
Right.
for many of us. And so yeah, it just reminded me of that that conversation I had.
Yeah.
Did you ever see I guess what you felt was harsh or unnecessary treatments by the guards toward inmates?
Yeah. I mean, I will say this, that I feel like, again, in the prison society, in the natural world society, you see a lot of things that aren't fair. You see a lot of people that don't follow the rules and the protocols and ethics of places where they are employed. And so, with that being said, there was a lot of things that happened in prison, again, that even if I didn't physically see it, I heard about it, where there were officers that weren't treating inmates fair, that weren't following the rules and the protocols. But again, I feel like, okay, as I mentioned earlier, prison is a different society.
Right.
Being out in the world and freedom is a different society. There's rule breakers out here, there's rule breakers within the prison system. And some of the things that went on weren't always inmates. Okay. Inmates getting things that they aren't supposed to have didn't come from another inmate or come from a family member that brought it. It came from somebody that worked there that
Right.
brought it to them. So, with that being said, there's a lot of different things that go on in there, that you hear about, that you see. People don't respect the boundaries. They don't respect the code of ethics where they work. But I think it just comes with the territory, whether you're in prison or out of prison.
you have a lot of prisoners who are in prison who are disrespectful. They're irate towards staff. They're hostile, and But to me, that almost goes without saying. You people are in prison for not following the rules, not knowing how to act. But you have a lot of people who assume that when a person puts on some type of like law enforcement, I guess a law enforcement uniform, they automatically become infallible and they're not gonna mess up and this and that. And I feel that if you're gonna take the position of a guard, you're supposed to be professional, like you say. It's a
Right.
code of ethics you're supposed to follow. But as humans, we don't always do that. But I think that people assume that these guards who work in prison, they never, they they don't show human emotion when
Right.
dealing with prisoners, because some
Right.
of the guards in there, they become friends with each other. It's a lot of nepotism in prison. It's a lot of guards who have family members that work in prison. And when a prisoner disrespects their friend or their family member, I believe in some situations the professionalism goes out the window and a person
Right.
becomes human, and they do things to the prisoners that's very unfair, and that
Right.
that goes unmentioned a lot of times. And so
Right.
you said you did see or hear of stuff like that happening.
Right, I did. But one of the things that I think is so important that you mentioned is that I think people have a stigma or a view about inmates because they're in prison, because they feel like every single person that has been convicted of a crime and has went to prison is guilty for whatever the crime that they were charged for committing. And I feel like people think that because you're in prison, you're supposed to get the worst treatment that there is possible in life.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I disagree, because I feel like as a human being, we all deserve respect. Because I will say that I've met some very respectful inmates in prison that did look out for me. And when I mean look out for me, that if just say somebody else said something to me that was disrespectful, they would basically check them, be like, look, like, don't talk to her like that, type of thing. But in order to get respect, you have to give respect. I don't care what the circumstances are, whether if a person is incarcerated or a person is not incarcerated. If a person wants respect, they have to give respect. So I feel like as a therapist, as an officer, if you want respect, you got to give it first. And
Right.
one of the things I would say for me is like, I didn't have a lot of situations where I got disrespected from inmates, from officers, as far as like, just really like being disrespectful for no reason. Because when I went to work, I was there to do a job, and my job was to help whoever was on my caseload. I intentionally, a lot of times, did not read people's paperwork for a
See
reason.
files.
Like, I was being mindful of, okay, why they were here and what they were charged for. But as far as like really looking into their cases and reading the details, intentionally didn't do that, because I didn't want to create a bias towards somebody and find myself in a situation where I was being judgmental towards a person. At all times, I was mindful of my safety. At all times, I was creating boundaries. But I was not there to rejudge you and say, hey, you were here for this, so you need to be treated like this. That's not my job. My job was there to help somebody to get through whatever it is that they were going through. And that's the way that I approached what I did there. I mean, I introduced a lot of people to Christ in there by just being a light and let my light shine. Whatever they did with the information I gave them, that was after I did my part. I didn't have nothing else to do after that. I led the person to the water, as far as like giving them tools and strategies that they need. Whether they drink the water, that was up to them. But I wanted to make sure that I was respectful at all times.
Right. And then, like you mentioned, not all guards were disrespectful and
No.
mean, but there were some guards who they felt that it was, I guess, part of their job duty to make sure we was treated with great disdain,
Right.
disrespectful, and they wanted to make sure we didn't get 1 cent over what we were supposed to get, and like I said, you had some guards who was cool and just if you treated them fair, they treated you fair. Would you ever consider being a guard?
Mm-mm.
No.
Nah, that's not my cup of tea.
Uh-huh.
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't like to be a guard. I mean, I definitely love the role that I was in when I was there. I'm a therapist. I was a therapist there. I'm still a therapist. Would I go back to the prison? Probably not. I felt like I did my term there. When my brother paroled, that was enough for me. Like I felt like that was my parole date too. When he paroled, I mean, I did eventually leave. I've had several opportunities to go back. I could go back, but I don't desire to go back. I felt like there's a season and time that you're supposed to do certain things, and I feel like that was my season, and I served my purpose in that moment.
Right. Because, sometimes in prison, and I'm sure you're aware, but people may not be aware, they have positions in prison, what's known as free staff. And
Uh-huh.
those people are who work in the prison, but not in the capacity of a guard, or not in the capacity of maybe how you worked with dealing with prisoners. But you may have a free staff, might be a person who works in the laundry, who's in charge of the laundry, or a person who's in charge of the canteen.
Mhm.
But the reason I asked you about that would had you ever considered being a guard, because I had seen people who were at one point free staff, and then they I guess went to guard school and turned out to be guards and stuff like that. So that's
Mhm.
why I asked that. Did you ever hear about women, whether guards or free staff or whoever, becoming involved in inmates in there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hear stories all the time. Like I said, it's almost like it's a soap opera. It's a soap opera in there. It's a whole nother, it's like reality TV in there.
Right.
But yeah, you hear different stories all the time about different people that are over familiar with inmates, over familiar with staff, and you hear about people getting in relationships. I mean, at the prisons that I worked at, I heard about it. Prisons that I didn't work at, I hear about it. You hear about stuff like that. Um, yeah, I know of one person that worked in my department specifically that was walked off the job because of being over familiar with the inmate, and I was basically in a relationship, and that person lost their license, and I'm sure lost their family too. So you hear about stuff all the time.
Now, for like a person who worked in there inside and saw everything, because I know a lot of I hear a lot of women say, oh, there ain't no way I throw away my good job and mess with a dude up in there. But what do you think, if any, sometimes is I guess the women who work in prison are intrigued and willing to risk losing their job? Maybe do you think some of those women don't get as much attention as they're getting from the prisoners in there, or I mean, and then of course, let's be honest, just like there's handsome, I mean, there's attractive women, there are some men in there, I'm sure, that women find attractive and handsome and stuff. So what do you think is like intrigues a woman who's willing to risk, like you say, losing her job, losing her license, or possibly going to prison herself by messing with a prisoner? Do you think
Right.
it's just human, just if two humans are around each other long enough sometimes, or what do you think?
Well, I think I was just going to say what you just said. I mean, at the end of the day, we're human and we all have eyes, right? If you see somebody, you might see somebody that you feel is attractive, whether it's a man or a woman. Okay, if they're in prison or out of prison, it doesn't mean that your eyes don't work and that you
Right.
don't feel like a person looks good. When it comes to that specific environment, that's where people are different. You don't know what a person's going through in their personal life when they come to work. You don't know what a person might say to somebody, just make them feel that connection or make them develop that intimate relationship. So, I mean, to hear the stories about people hooking up with officers and inmates is not unrealistic because, again, you never know what life might deal you, right? And you never know what path you might go down. You never know what you might experience in life. Like, so for people to say, oh, I would never do that, never say never, because you don't know what you might encounter. So, I mean, I hope that answered your question because, I mean, again, the person that I knew that got walked off the job, you at least expect that person to have that situation happened to them. But again, it just goes back to boundaries. It goes back to understanding and knowing your role and following the code of ethics. I mean, if we don't follow that, okay, it's the same thing in prison, out of prison. You hear about sexual harassment stuff all the time. As a
Right.
therapist, we have codes of ethics and we're not supposed to engage in relationships with our clients, but you hear about people all the time losing their license because they entered into a romantic relationship with their client.
Right. Now, when you work in prison, how many would you say, how many prisoners or whatever do you think you had to rebuff and shoot down?
Probably a lot. I mean, I wasn't counting, but probably a lot because again, I mean, you get people trying to cross their line, and that's really all it is. They're trying, I mean, people want to see how far they can go. Like, I
Right.
mean, they don't have nothing but time to look at you and watch and learn you and see what you're doing every day when you walk in there. I mean, I would have people noticing me that I didn't even know was looking at me, and they just happen to encounter me watching out the window, watching me come into work every day, my same pattern going into work. If I came in there with a McDonald's bag 2 or 3 times, oh, don't worry, I'm gonna get somebody comment and say, oh, you didn't get McDonald's today.
Right.
So I think people will try to cross their line. So I've had several people say different things, try to get at me in different ways. But again, it goes back to maintaining those professional boundaries, because if you don't have them, you can easily get baited in.
Right. And the reason that I asked you about the specific number of prisoners that you shot down, because are you ready to shoot down one more? Can I have your number? No, I'm just I'm just messing with you. I'm just messing with you. And I really listen. I really appreciate you coming on today, and I really think it was very informative. To have you on here to explain the side that sometimes is not often talked about or addressed. One more time, though, can you please let us know about your book and your YouTube channel?
Yes, my YouTube channel is Motivational Master-Peace, Niesha Davis, LCSW. Definitely look, follow me, subscribe. Again, I'm just offering tools and strategies to help you to become the master of your own peace of mind and to just cope through life's challenges. If you're not ready to see a therapist, the YouTube channel is not therapy, but definitely as a therapist, I'm giving you therapeutic tools and strategies. The book, Your Story Does Not Define You, a healing journey from trauma through self-expression and self-affirmation. And if I just could add, for those of you that may be watching this, I know in prison there's a stigma associated with mental health, but mental health is so real, and you don't have to have a severe mental diagnosis. You could, like you said, lose a loved one, lose a relationship, lose anything. Being in prison is a hard place to be. And even if you don't feel motivated or encouraged, or because of politics can't talk to somebody that is a mental health therapist, please, please utilize tools and strategies to help you remain in a healthy place. If that's working out, if that's writing people, writing in a journal, whatever it may be, meditation, prayer, whatever works for you, definitely do something to keep your mental health sane.
Okay, and thank you very much. And I was going to ask at the end, is there anything else that you wanted to add, or any other line of question, or anything that you wanted to address or say before we got out of here?
Yeah, that's kind of really, I can't reiterate it enough. Like again, I will say I didn't judge inmates when I went to work. Like again, I maintained my safety precautions, I maintained appropriate boundaries and did a job, because again, I realized the need that people have to maintain their sanity. Prison is a place that if you don't work there, you will never understand what actually really goes in there. And even the magnitude that I worked at, I didn't even completely understand all of the things. However, I do understand that people are human, and everybody's soul and everybody needs to be mentally stable. And so with that being said, I understand that there are politics and there's rules and things that people have to abide by. And sometimes you can't access triple CMS, or sometimes you can't access EOP. But even in that, please take care of yourself. Please make sure that you are okay mentally, because there's so many different things, so many darkness, just so much darkness in the world today, that I feel like we have to be able to learn how to protect ourselves.
And two quick questions that just popped up. Do you
Mhm.
feel that the people in there received adequate health care? Because in my experience, sometimes the health care in prison that we receive was only as good as the person giving it. Sometimes people viewed it as a job. You could tell sometimes other people had a passion for it. How do you feel the health care in prison was?
I will agree with what you said. I think the care is as good as the person that you're getting it from, because people have different mindsets, different mentalities. Some people, again, genuinely care about people regardless of the circumstances, and they want to make sure that you're okay, versus other people that are there for a check and feel like I'm going to do the bare minimum.
Right.
So,
And then also, if any, what made you leave working in the prison, in the prison industry, or in the prison field? Do you just feel it was time to go, or do you not want to say, or?
Yeah, no, I just felt like it was my season. I felt like it was time for me to go. I had several opportunities to be able to go back. However, I felt like I did my job there. That was the time that I was supposed to be there. But with the work that I do, like I definitely have different interactions with the people that I work with outside of prison. And I been in prison limited some of the things that I could do as far as helping people. And so I felt like, not being in prison, doing a lot of other things outside of prison has been what I've been called to do. I feel like while I was there for those 5 years was the time that I should have been there.
Right. And once again, by me doing a long time in prison, I could definitely say, we definitely appreciated when we encountered people like you that seemed cool, down to earth, and was there, to do their job and not try to make our lives miserable and stuff. So I'm pretty sure that everybody you did encounter appreciated you and stuff. It's always nice to be in prison and still get treated with some form of humanity and stuff like that. So
absolutely, I agree. Thank you. That was definitely a goal of mine. One thing I will say that as a sister, I didn't judge nobody. I tried my hardest not to judge people. Like for one, I shared with you, I had a brother that was in prison. I had another brother that served time in prison. I know people that have been to prison, and I was raised in the hood for sure. So it's like life happens, sometimes people end up in prison because of a bad mistake or a bad decision that they made. It doesn't mean that they're a bad person. Sometimes, a lot of us could have been in prison. We just didn't get caught with some of the stuff that we did. So people that are in prison doesn't mean that they're the scum of the earth. People make bad decisions, and sometimes you just don't get a chance to have a do-over. Some people do, some people don't.
Most definitely. And some of those guards who worked in prison was just a search away from being in prison a damn cell.
That's the truth. That's the truth. Granted, you do have people that really commit crimes that need to go serve some time. However, again, you have people that made a bad decision and there was no opportunity to do a do-over. We all probably had an opportunity to be in prison if we, but we got away.
And so I definitely appreciate you for coming, sharing your story with us and stuff. And it definitely was a pleasure to have you on the show. And I think I did a whole bunch of interviews, and I think you are the most attractive guest that I've had. I think it's easy to say that by far. So I appreciate you for coming. Thank you for sharing your story, and you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right.
Dear God, please don't let me relapse and return to the G-Ride with 3 straps, with ski mask with the case, squeezing key zaps, spraying everything from a nigga's brain to his kneecaps. Dear God, please don't let me relapse and return to the G-Ride with the 3 straps, with ski mask with the case, squeezing key zaps, spraying everything from a nigga's brain to his kneecaps. I don't put shit on Facebook, I just holler in person. Put the pistol in your mouth while you're hollering and cursing. All that shit you kept rehearsing and put on your live, got your clap with the big 4-5. You bitch nigga, if you tell me to pull up, I'ma do that. That nigga who was woofing first nigga that I shoot at. Ski mask on my face, bystanders be like, who that? I ain't with the talking, bitch boy, I thought you knew that. Leave his brains where my shoe at, and bounce like I'm on a trampoline. Leave you laid out, nigga, like you camping on the scene. If you want something sweet, grab a peach or tangerine. Niggas won't smoke, well fuck it, I'ma let them handle steam. AR with the beam, you see the red dot? We'll tug on this trigger, nigga, it'll make your head pop. Blood pouring down to your shoes, call it Red Sox. Your brains hanging all over your shoulders like some dreadlocks. Expect the gang of dead off if they ever cross the line. The Lord said in the Bible, oh, revenge is mine. So I'm just trying to find a righteous path between the two, before I lose control and do the shit I used to do. This being humble shit is new. I'm trying to turn the other cheek, but I ain't never been a bitch, so watch your mouth when you speak. Your mercy's what I seek, so I pray on bended knees. Don't let me get the K with the extended clip and squeeze. Lord, please. Dear God, please don't let me relapse and return to the G-Ride with 3 straps, with ski mask with the case, squeezing key zaps, spraying everything from a nigga's brain to his kneecaps. Dear God, please don't let me relapse and return to the G-Ride with the 3 straps, with ski mask with the case, squeezing key zaps, spraying everything from a nigga's brain to his kneecaps.